Maybe I'm not correct on that, but essentially, to cut through all the detail, we would like to know if the Department of Health is aware of this report. Can you tell us with certainty as to whether it has been or has not been concluded? We haven't been able to determine that, and where does it fit into the issue of determining whether the department will proceed with medication such as Aricept or what have you? And I think this here report would certainly be helpful in determining as to whether the use of medication such as Aricept or whatever other medication could be applied to help to prevent or reduce the effects of Alzheimer's or the progression of Alzheimer's. And I would think that this would be a very important document that any government would want to jump on pretty quick, particularly if we've paid for it through departmental funds.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Mr. Chair, all we can do is check on the status of that report, whether or not it is complete, and if it's ready for publication. Certainly, a report that was supposed to be ready the first week in April, by any kind of government standard, you'd have to ask what year. But anyway, Mr. Chair, we will check on the status of that report, and any government, and a separate study and recommendations have been made by the Atlantic Formulary Group that will be studied and a decision made in the next few weeks regarding the coverage of the Alzheimer's drugs of which you spoke. That is something that the premiers and ministers will ultimately decide on, but the deputies are going to have a look at the recommendations of the Atlantic Formulary people on how and if several of the Alzheimer's drugs should be made available in the Atlantic provinces. So that decision is pending regardless of the outcome of this particular study. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the minister is saying something a little different than what her deputy said when he was before public accounts. The determination of the results of or the findings of this study had absolutely nothing to do with the determination as to whether the government would proceed with a decision on Aricept or any other medication to combat Alzheimer's. So there's a bit of confusion within the Department of Health, but so I guess I'll leave it with them right now. Since they're in a state of confusion, I'll allow them to kind of think about it for a while, and maybe we'll move on to another issue that we can get some clarity. And that's with regards to the recent announcement by the minister regarding nursing home funding. And I was pleased, quite frankly, to see that there was some movement in that with regards to reducing the burden for seniors in terms of nursing home cost, the medical cost. And I think that's essentially what the minister was moving towards, having absolutely zero medical cost. And by the year 2007, that would result in a significant benefit to seniors right across this province. But there was one missing factor in the equation, as best I could determine, and that is with regards to some of the new nursing homes that are being constructed present day. As the minister will be aware of Harbourstone nursing home. It replaces Breton Bay nursing home in Sydney, and I must say it's an excellent facility. But the per diems for seniors have gone from $135 a day to $195 a day. Now, that's a rather significant increase. And I understand that the private proponent has cost, and in all likelihood are providing additional amenities and support systems and perhaps a whole lot of other components that wouldn't be provided in the older facility, and I understand that. But that doesn't appear to be taken into the equation of what the minister announced. Now, when you go from $135 a day to $195 a day, effective, I believe it's April 1st this year, or maybe it was sometime in the early part of 2003, that throws all these figures out the window. And I'll give you an example. For an Alzheimer's patient that would have been entered into the nursing home 4 or 5 years ago, and all the calculations for what percentage of the family income would go towards his or her maintenance or support in the nursing home vis-a-vis what would be left for the family, all that's out the window now because of the new fees. And none of that was contemplated, and there are considerable numbers of families that are adversely affected. Now, that's only one institution, and I'm sure there might be other institutions. Has the minister taken into account these unexpected fee increases?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I talk a bit about that, I'd like to go back to the issue of the study on the Alzheimer's drugs. I may not have made myself clear. I was saying that the Atlantic Formulary Group has done a review of these Alzheimer's drugs, and that review will be presented to the deputy ministers within the next couple of weeks, irrespective of the study that was done for the foundation. So we are proceeding on that track, whether or not the study that the member from Cape Breton West referred to is published last week, this week, or next week. As the member knows, the capital costs of the homes, the nursing homes, are figured into the per diems, and obviously the newer, more expensive homes have higher per diems for now. What we will see at the end of the 4-year period is all the medical costs will be paid by the province, and the per diems are going to be averaged across the province so that no matter what your income, you will be paying the same. So you're not going to see a situation where, again, if you're wealthier, you're in the newer, more expensive nursing homes. I think the member's also aware some of the older ones are very nice nursing homes and have very good reputations, and people are very anxious to get into them. But we are not looking at a new form of discrimination. Your daily rates are going to be based on your income, not your assets. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
I'm not sure exactly what the minister is trying to tell us here. I understand that you're going to change the formula for calculating entrance requirements. You're going to go from a total asset base to just strictly income. Now, someone, when they retire, most people, their income will drop. Okay, and if they have significant asset base, they may convert that into capital, which they'll put in the bank. You're saying that that won't be included now. Is that what the minister is saying?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The idea is that by the end of this time period, we will be out of the asset business. And in Ontario and in the Western provinces, the rate that seniors pay for nursing homes is based on their income. And generally, there is some income, pension income, so on. And that, what they can afford to pay is what they pay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would submit that there are a lot of shrewd business people around Nova Scotia who could certainly depress their level of income through different corporate tax shelters and their ability to move dollars around in different pockets. So that really doesn't answer. All we're doing is eliminating one problem and creating another. So the inequity may go from bad to worse based on what the minister has just indicated. So based on the intent of what she hopes to achieve, does she have anything substantive to be able, any documentation or any analysis, financial detail that would be able to show a projection of what the government hopes to achieve by moving from Formula A to Formula B, so to speak?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My guess would be we probably have about several dozen tons of documents looking at this issue from various points of view. What we're doing here is moving to a new model that is based on income. I know what the member from Cape Breton West is talking about. It is one of the things that we discussed among ourselves during discussions about changing from asset-based to just strictly income-based assessments. And yes, it is probably true that some shrewd person or estate planner can find a way to hide assets. But obviously, Mr. Chair, this is happening right now. I mean, if a family chooses or a person chooses to take the point of view that, well, you better prepare for the day you have to be in a nursing home and everything it's happening right now. That those with the means are able to divest themselves of assets before they go into nursing homes, whether it's 3 years before or 2 years before or 1 year before, and in terms of the look-back period. And what we have decided is that even though it will take several years, that we don't want to be in the business of doing that anymore, that people will pay based upon their ability to pay, on their income, and that if they want to leave assets to their families or to charitable foundations or whatever they want to do with it, that the province should be out of the business of doing that. And, we think the so-called losses to the province will be minimal compared to the gains for seniors in the nursing homes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the minister still hasn't answered the question. What is the cost analysis? Have you done a cost analysis? How much will it cost the province by shifting from one model to the other model. And, that's as simple as we can make it.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, we obviously have done the analysis because our analysis shows us that this will cost the province roughly $40 million a year to move ahead to this model when it is fully implemented. That $40 million is in today's dollars, so it will obviously be somewhat more depending upon the economy and other costs in years to come. But those costs would be incurred regardless. We would still see a certain amount of inflation. We would still see increases in wages. Those costs would be incurred regardless. So what we are saying is, all the modeling that we have done shows that to do the medical costs alone would cost us $35 million approximately in today's dollars at the end of the 4-year period, and that to move to this other step of eliminating the asset inspection would add another $5 million a year. And we believe this is fairer to all seniors, and that it is time that we did move to the model used in other provinces. And it will cost more than just paying for medical costs, but it will not be a huge cost. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
I sense that really I'm looking for a little more clarity on the income model, because this is where the clawback period would be very important, I would think, because someone, the day before they decide they want to apply to go to a nursing home, can convert all their assets into liquid, into dollars. So the minister is saying, okay, well, that's fine, or they can convert their assets, to convey them to someone else, or they can convert them into dollars and give them to their children. So that factor still has to be considered somewheres. Otherwise, you're not talking 35 or 40 million. You could be talking twice that amount of money when you take the total number of seniors that you're dealing with in this province. So would the minister please be kind enough to provide us some detail as to what are the other factors that are attached to the income model?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the department looked at what is done in other provinces and how it works, what the averages are. We looked at, maximum and minimum exposures of moving to this model, and our best estimates are that $40 million a year in today's dollars is about right. If you took every worst case scenario you could think of, you might be at 46. I believe that's what our modeling shows. But we are looking at the majority of people being honest, and the majority of people, do have some income to apply to their room and board. And bottom line, we believe this is a better and fairer model. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the chair.
Thank you.
I sense that the minister and her government is panicking because of pressures that were put by the socialists, because they tried to capitalize on not only the fact that there was a real issue here, but they went around the province in an emotional roller coaster performance scenario, going from town hall to town hall, telling the seniors what a terrible job, but they would never say themselves, precisely what they were going to do. It was what what all the things that others did that were so terrible. And that's the same with not just on this issue, but also in the insurance issue and so on. But based on what the minister's just explained, it's almost as if there was some political pressure there to kind of move in that direction, because the public opinion was, or the perception was, that the government's a big bad wolf taken from these seniors. And in many cases, that's true. But jumping from the grease into the fire isn't necessarily the answer either, just because the socialists are on a roller coaster ride with public opinion and emotion, which they usually try and capitalize on to get anybody's.
You're usually on a down, but now you're even down.
But perhaps, Mr. Chairman, if the member who just entered had listened to the entire conversation, he would know that I addressed some of his out-of-context quips. But being a socialist, they only want to know all the bad things that other people do. They don't want to know the good things. And I appreciate that, because generally their philosophy is what's theirs is theirs, and what's yours is theirs. And what's yours is also ours. They've got a mixed philosophy. So we have to take that in perspective. But my concern is, number one, that a lot of seniors and their families, particularly if you have a couple that have worked all their lives, and they may save, let's say, $40,000, $50,000. They may have 3 or 4 children and X number of grandchildren, and they want to give that, to their family. Maybe they don't even have that much money. Maybe they just have their pensions and their supplements, and a little bit of a company pension or whatever. And they may have their family home or maybe a piece of land, a cottage. And then all of a sudden, that's stripped away from them, in essence, because under the present formula, and the minister has indicated they're going to try and move from that. But essentially, the overwhelming majority of the ones that are on asset base is because that's all they have. Those that have the good fortune of being able to have sufficient asset base to move it into a liquid form and still have an asset base that they can shelter, or they can shelter on one side or the other. And there are a fair number in Nova Scotia, because I remember, and that's why this moving from one formula to the other is of absolute importance. And I remember quite distinctly back in the early part of 1999, when the member for Lunenburg Lunenburg East was on this side of the floor, and he was very anxious to see the government compel seniors to spend more of their pensionable income, because there was so much income that was, in his view, socked away. And the concern is that the government will move to this other model, and although the optics will be, well, yes, we're going to take some pressure off all these people that are suffering today, but we'll have a whole new series of problems tomorrow that'll impact on a greater number. And the government hasn't clarified in sufficient detail that would give a comfort level, in my view anyway, because the minister herself just moments ago indicated that it would depend on the economy, the budgetary situation. So it's only a plan into the future, 4 years down the road. I mean, is the minister contemplating on introducing legislation to make that a reality? Is the minister going to have regulations that would clearly spell out how this process would unfold? Is she going to do it before the election? Or is it just a promissory note? I mean, it sounds good at the outset, but when you start looking into the detail, it gets pretty ugly. And if you think the NDP with their scaremongering is bad, wait until the people of Nova Scotia start to absorb the real concern that this could create. I mean, that's the problem I have with it. I'm not suggesting that it's what the minister is doing is wrong. I'm not suggesting it's right. What I'm suggesting is that the minister hasn't provided enough detail to tell us anything other than the good press release that she put out. And that's not enough. Mr. Chairman, the last thing we ever need is any more questions from the NDP, because they've been asking them for years, and it's to the point where they can't even answer their own questions. So, but I'll leave that particular issue.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Cape Breton West shouldn't be distracted by the rabbit tracks from his colleagues to the right.
That's right, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you not to be distracted by socialist rabbit tracks. So I would submit to the minister that perhaps she could provide the committee with a little more detail other than the generalities that she seemed to have put here before the committee today.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this change won't require legislation. It's a change in departmental policy. And at the end of the four years, seniors, they won't be forced to liquidate their assets. They won't even have to think about that. It's going to be a model that is not based on a socialist system, if you will. Right now, and the way the system has grown up, it's an issue of the government deciding what it will take from you, what you can afford, and so on and so forth. The other model, which is used in socialist provinces as well as non-socialist provinces, is based on the income of the people involved. We don't go in to look at their woodlots or their cottages or cars or anything. What people choose to do with those assets will be entirely their own business. They will pay per diem room and board costs, and the province will pay their medical care costs. I mean, obviously, right now, we pay the medical care costs if they go to hospital, but what we're referring to are the medical care costs of their actual care in the nursing home, which is the issue that no one in this House really believes is entirely fair the way it works now. But that is one thing, but the worst irritant to people going through the system, the thing that bothers them the most about the present system, aside from the philosophy of it, is people from the government going through their private affairs and telling them what they can and can't have and what they can do with their stuff, whether they have a very little or none or a lot. And that is the system that is going to change and should change. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hardly suspect that the minister would ever agree with the socialist, but it's important for the member for Sackville-Cobequid to be an optimist. You know, he knows full well socialists will never ever get in government in Nova Scotia. They have a better chance of getting hit with a Soviet missile than they do of getting in government. But Mr. Chairman, well, we'll be working with them on that side of the floor, I can assure you that. Of course, nothing. But anyway, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ignore the rabbit tracks of the socialists. I want to focus on a local concern, and that's in the communities of Donkin, Port Morion, Birch Grove, Tower Road, that entire the they are referred to as one of the catchment areas for the Glace Bay General Hospital. And that's a community hospital, as we all know. But the emergency room at the Glace Bay General closed, I believe, 32 times in the last year. And I would ask the minister as to what steps she and her department are taking to correct that problem. The reason why I ask it is because, as she well knows, in Cape Breton we have an aging population, and that's no different in these communities than it is for the rest of Cape Breton Island. And it's in close proximity, much closer than if they had to go to the Cape Breton Regional or the Waterford General or whatever. And it's an area of growing concern, and I would ask the minister if she could give us some clarification as to what the plan is for this year.
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, the member's colleague from Glace Bay was asking this and similar questions yesterday, and I endeavored to provide an answer, or undertook, sorry, to provide an answer. And I do have some answers here to the questions that were asked yesterday, and I will table this document. But I would like to read some of the points associated with the question the member asked. And some of the actions and results are a new emergency physician began practice in March. Another will be starting soon, if not already. Another, with the exact date not yet clarified, will be doing emergency in Glace Bay and Sydney. That a family physician has begun work in Glace Bay this week. An emergency room physician will begin work in July after finishing a residency program. A family physician will begin within 2 weeks in New Waterford. There have been 6 site visits set up by the recruitment office since January with 4 recruits. These visits are all booked and financed through our office. And in general, the DHA and the Department of Health have been working together to assure that the medical needs of the community are met. So we're very well aware of the situation in Glace Bay and area, and I'll table that document. And are aware that the lack of physicians, even though it's an attractive area for physicians, is what has been causing the issue at the Glace Bay Hospital. And that obviously closing the emergency ward 32 times, or even 30 times, or 34, whatever, is definitely not good, because people cannot rely on an emergency room that's closed that often. There is no plan or belief that the emergency ward should be anything other than open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
I'm winding down on my questions, Mr. Chair, for my colleague from Cape Breton Nova to fill the rest of our hour. But one final issue is with regards to the air ambulance program. As the minister is aware, the province took over the administration of that program in the last fiscal year. Would the minister be able to confirm as to whether the province is able to operate that more cheaply than the private proponent who was operating it prior to? Because that was the undertaking that was given to members of the legislature last year.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'll have to provide that information either later today or tomorrow. There were staff savings involved in this change, but there were other costs that went up after 9/11. So we're going to have to look at how exactly that breaks down as to where the savings were and what were extra costs incurred that might not have been anticipated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I hope the minister wasn't being mischievous here, and this reminds me a bit of the Premier saying, that one of the reasons tourism was down last year was because of 9/11. But when you look at the statistical analysis that was provided, showing the Premier at that time why tourism numbers were down, all the factors were pre-September 11th. So if the minister is going to provide that type of detail, I would hope that she would break it down so we would see exactly how 9/11 was a factor. Because let's not forget, if what the minister is saying is correct, then that's an issue that should be charged back to the federal government through EMO, and the minister knows that. So I think it's very important, the promise by the government when that transfer of responsibility was taking place, was that the government could do it cheaper. And what I've heard here today is the government is not doing it cheaper. It's more expensive. And maybe not. 9/11 was a factor. It's important to note as well that there was considerable documentation provided at that time by a number of different stakeholders that would suggest it could have been, and it was being done cheaper than the government could possibly do it. So I'll take that on notice from the minister, and I thank her for her answers to my questions.
The member for... No, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify. It wasn't direct cost to do with 9/11 that I was referring to, but simply that 9/11 triggered increased cost in running airplanes and air travel for everyone involved in that industry, regardless of whether it's a business like Air Canada or whether it's Air Ambulance. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton Nova, and the honourable member has until 4:45.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hardly enough time to get warmed up, but let me get started anyway. Mr. Chairman, I'm very glad to see you in the chair this afternoon, because I know what a great representative you are, not just of Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley, but also of the truckers of Nova Scotia. And I know that your heart is with the truckers left, right, and center. And having said that, I think you will agree with me that it would have been very convenient, perhaps more convenient, to have been a trucker in the days of Premier Donald Cameron than it is today. Because in those fine times, if a trucker had the right type of vehicle and a bucket of white paint, he could set himself up in the ambulance business pretty quickly, with perhaps a red cross on the side of each door. Because there wasn't any governing regulations in those times to set up an ambulance. I know that most funeral directors in the province also ran ambulance services, but not necessarily, and neither was the practice restricted to the funeral directors. Anyone who had a vehicle who wanted to call themselves an ambulance service could set one up. Now, it's when I reflect on the good workings of the Liberal government that I think how we brought that to an end and replaced it with the system we have now of the emergency health care service, which, while not perfect, certainly contains a lot better potential for delivery of service, and perhaps is a lot more reliable, I should think. Certainly has perhaps better trained quality crew, professionals working on the ambulances that have gone to courses and learned not what a doctor knows necessarily, but learned enough to be able to administer first aid on the spot and get victims to the hospital as promptly as possible, and do that not as a filler in between delivering dead bodies for burial or other such services, but as a full-time occupation. And every time when I drive home and through the riding of my good friend from Richmond, who I don't see here right now, but I'm not supposed to say that, I notice the ambulances parked overhead on a certain overpass that you go underneath as you go on the Fleur-de-Lis Trail as you get up to Sydney. I wouldn't say that they're waiting for the next accident to happen, any more than I'd say that about fire trucks that are parked on the ready at the fire station waiting for the next fire. But they're on the ready. They're following the old Boy Scout motto of be prepared. And that is something that our party did during its years in power that is reflected in the estimates now before us, if you want me to make my remarks relevant to the estimate.
Well, I might just comment, Honourable Member, seeing as how you referenced my former vocation, that I don't recall any of my colleagues taking a bucket of white or red paint and plastering it on, or blue paint and plastering it on the sides of those dump trucks. But carry on. The relevance, I'm sure, is coming.
Well, sir, I think what they needed was more of a van type, something of that type. If you owned a van, and you could put a stretcher into the back part, a Suburban perhaps, something of that sort, a station wagon, or maybe one of these long limos that I see being driven around town, the Cadillacs that are about 75 yards long. If you had that type of truck, you were all set to go trucking. That's the point. And now it's not quite the case. So, you know, the reason I'm mentioning that is we're dealing here with the estimates of the Department of Health. And many good friends of mine served in the capacity of Minister of Health. The Honourable Bernie Boudreau, Dr. Jim Smith, Dr. Ron Stewart, among others. Yes, they did. And they did their best, just as I'm sure this minister is doing. And she's somewhat new on the job because the minister before her had done what he could do. And so it was time for him to move on to other tasks. And that's the way it goes. And I've seen all these people at close range struggling with all the work they had to cope with. I remember Bernie Boudreau taught me very soon in the game that health consumes 1/4 of the provincial budget. It's the largest department. Take any other 2 or 3 and add them together, and you're not getting to the size of health. And I remember when Mr. Boudreau was Minister of Health, I called his office one day and I asked the secretary, is that memo that I sent over to Mr. Boudreau on his desk? Oh, yes, she said, it's on his desk. Well, there was something about the tone of voice that made me think, I wonder where it is on his desk. So I went over to the 4th floor in the provincial building, and I went past the secretary to the minister's desk, and he had a huge desk. It was about as big as that table, or bigger. And on the desk, there were piles of files about that high up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of incoming work that he had to deal with. And I'm sure that the memo I had sent the minister was somewhere in one of those 8 piles. The secretary was right. But whether he would ever get to see it in that context, I wasn't sure. So I found my memo, knowing what to look for, pulled it out, and gave it to the secretary and said, when Mr. Boudreau comes in, you give him this file for me, would you please? She said, yes, I will. So then I was sure that he would get it. But I say that story to illustrate the pressures under which any Minister of Health operates. This is a big portfolio. This covers 1/4 of the total budget of Nova Scotia, and 1/4, approximately we shall say, of government activity in the province. So when we meet here, well, I guess we'll have to say 1/4 of our time should be devoted to health, meaning that Monday and 1/4 of one further day, weekly, should be devoted to health, just to give it proportionate treatment to what it deserves. Now, having made those fine points, I think my time is just about run out. 2 minutes. Well, it's pretty hard for me to sum up the rest of what I feel about health in 2 minutes, Mr. Speaker. But let me say it is a big subject. It is a big subject, and certainly we will want to deal with it here in the estimates in some amount of time. I'm not saying to hold it up or to prevent the other departments from being heard, but certainly there is a great deal in this field that warrants exploration. Now, there's much I could say on that. I can tell you that most of the hospitals within the service area that I represent are in a continuous state of fear and trembling. Not shocking and appalling, but fear and trembling. Why? Because they don't feel confident there that their facility will continue to be in operation. The New Waterford Hospital has been lingering under a cloud of uncertainty for years. The Glace Bay Hospital seems to be in an even worse situation. You know, the outlook in New Waterford is, can we keep the hospital going? In Glace Bay, the outlook seems to be more that the hospital is almost doomed, and it's just a matter of staying off the inevitable until it actually happens. You know, I'm not sure that this kind of health delivery system is good for the communities, because in each community, a hospital is sort of like a mainstay of the community. It's like the school, it's like the fire station, the post office. When you take those things away, many people think we don't have a community anymore. It's gone. So I think we have to be very careful. We have to be ultra protective, if that word is parliamentary, of our hospitals and keep them in full operational capacity wherever we can. Now, if we have a surplus of hospitals because past Tory governments built too many, one on every corner, oh, you don't want me to get into that one, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know what, sir? I agree with you. I think that the time is up, and we'll continue on a future date.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to take only a few minutes of our time today before I pass the floor back to my colleague from Halifax Needham. I would like to tackle a subject that has been referred to by the member for Cape Breton West, and that is the Health Research Foundation. Now, Mr. Chairman, one has to keep in mind here that we actually feel that the Health Research Foundation came into being because of the work that we did on this side of the House. The Liberals had promised it in 2 elections and failed to deliver, and it was because of the pressure that we put on the McClellan government in 1998 that they felt that they had no alternative but to finally keep their election promises, which is not something they were used to doing. But at the time, the Minister of Health, the member for Dartmouth East, as he was then and is now, made a commitment that the funding for the Health Research Foundation would be at least $5 million per year. And that's what the government has done. Now, the problem is, let me just wrap up that thought by saying that's why I think we in the NDP feel particularly possessive and particularly proud of the Health Research Foundation. The problem is the way it's reported in the accounts. And the reason it became such an issue was because, of course, last year, the government had a razor-thin surplus at budget time, $1.8 million, and it seemed clear that among the multitude of budgetary flimflammery that the government was pulling last year, one of the most obvious ones was the fact that they were year after year after year, they were allocating $5 million to the Health Research Foundation, but they were only reporting $2.5 million. Now, various ministers and departmental officials have tried to explain that, but there is no explaining it. You can perhaps in the first year of operation, perhaps in a partial year of operation, you can say, okay, well, on a full year basis, it was $5 million, but in the partial year, it was $2.5. But what nobody can explain is how you can do that year after year after year. Spend 5 and report 2.5. Now, Mr. Chairman, because this is a particular interest of mine, I turned to the Health Research Foundation grant in this year's supplementary estimates, and what do I find? Have they done what they've done before? No. They've done something that seems incomparably worse, Mr. Chairman. And so my question to the Minister is this. The estimate for last year, as usual, was $2.5 million. But the executive director of the Health Research Foundation came to this House and said that the government had committed $5 million. The foundation was spending $5 million. And then later that same day, the Minister of Finance said, and I quote, "Medical research is a priority of this government," end of quote. And what the minister was trying to say was that the $5 million was going to be an ongoing commitment of this government. So I wonder if the minister could explain to me that if the executive director says they got $5 million and spent $5 million, if the minister says that he gave the foundation $5 million, why, how, in the name of tarnation, can the estimates report that $2.5 million was spent? What's going on?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What we're doing here with the $4.5 million that we're giving to the health, to the foundation, is as close as we could manage in this year to giving the $5 million in a way, so it's 4.5 instead of 5, in a way to make the grant more transparent. I mean, that's what we're doing. We would have liked to have that line read $5 million, but there was a lot of pressures on the health budget this year, so we made it 4.5. The member does know that, of course, what we give the foundation and what they spend aren't necessarily the same because of all the matching grants and so on that they're able to lever, and it's important that they be able to do that. But, you know, the Auditor General and the opposition and so on, the accounting procedures were questioned, so what we're endeavoring to do here is to clear that up by saying straight out, there's your 4.5, even though they would like more. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax, Fairview.
Thank you to the minister for that answer, but the minister answered a question that I didn't ask. I'm not asking yet, although I'm going to get to that, about the $4.5 million. I'm now asking about the forecast figure for 02 or 03. The Minister of Finance says they spent $5 million. The Executive Director of the Foundation says they spent $5 million, but the forecast figure says 2.5. What's going on when everybody agrees that $5 million was spent, but the forecast says it was only 2.5? How can you do that?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's because of the previous year issue. We gave them 2.5 and forecast they would spend the 2.5 that we gave them that year. But there was still other money that they had, as I understand it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax, Fairview.
Mr. Chairman, the problem with that answer is just not true. The province didn't give them $2.5 million. The province gave them $5 million. The Minister of Finance says so. The Executive Director of the Foundation says so. And for the life of me, I cannot understand how people can keep getting up in this House and trying to explain how $5 million in reality becomes $2.5 million in the estimates. But I'm going to leave that because I'm getting the same non-answers from this minister that I got from the previous minister. I'm going to move on now. I'm going to move on now to the answer that the minister gave to my first question, or the answer she gave to the question I didn't ask. The minister says they're trying to clear things up, make it more transparent, and to that I say, hallelujah. It's about time. I do agree with the member for Cape Breton West that what's really going on here is the government got caught. They got caught misreporting the finances of the Health Research Foundation because it was convenient for them to do so. Now, The minister says, okay, now, this year, finally, it's going to be open and transparent. And yet the commitment of the Liberal government and the commitment of this government was to give the foundation at least $5 million a year. And now I look in the estimates, and it's not $5 million anymore, it's less than that. Is this government backing off on its previously firm commitment to give at least $5 million a year to the Health Research Foundation? And if it's not backing off that commitment, why is it reporting a lower figure in this year's estimates?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I've been fairly clear about that we looked everywhere for that $500,000. We had a lot of pressures in health this year, including some help for seniors in long-term care, that there comes a point in the budgeting process where you cannot find that $500,000 or $1 million or $10 million or whatever it is that you need and would like to put into a particular area. So what we're doing here is giving them 4.5. We feel that that is manageable. It is enough money to allow the foundation to lever other money from other sources, and we'll look at what we can do in upcoming years. But this year, the figure is $4.5 million. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Halifax Fairview.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the NDP's health critic, the member for Halifax Needham, for allowing me some time. I would now like to cede the floor to my colleague, the member for Cape Breton Centre.
Who's that?
The member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, my colleagues. A quick question to the Minister. Minister, a problem that seems to be arising more and more through the hospital locations is fees for parking. Now, when I first approached the CEO of my DHA, said that these parking lots are items that are not covered by the budgetary process from the province. Can you explain why that would be? Why wouldn't you cover parking lots?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, the answer to that, the simple answer is the competition for healthcare dollars. And parking is necessary for a great many people. The fees are not terribly high, depending on your income or how often you have to be there. It is common to have parking fees for hospitals across the country, and it is a way in which the hospitals can recover some revenues, because regardless of whether it comes from their area or their budget or the provincial taxpayer or the federal taxpayer, it is still a cost that has to be covered. And there are abilities for hospitals or administrations to waive these fees in certain circumstances of extreme hardship. But I certainly do not see that any of the parking charges in our hospitals in Nova Scotia are excessive to most people, although they may be excessive to some. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton Centre.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I guess that's a fundamental debate around healthcare at all. You know, accessibility and what may not be onerous to me may be onerous to my neighbor, and vice versa. So, you know, and what's extremely frustrating is when you see facilities that have been in place for years that didn't have a parking fee now are being visited upon. In particular, I'm thinking about the Glace Bay General. That hospital has a fee coming up now. So you know, these are not, we're not talking about facilities in areas like that are in here at the QE2 sites where you have high volume of automobiles and very little real estate in which to park your vehicles, and it's a way to garner revenue. But I mean, it's one would assume it would have been part of the whole healthcare package. So, and I hear what the minister says. I know that, in fact, at the regional complex in Cape Breton, where if you have a family member or whatever that is receiving some form of longer-term care, that you can buy a voucher or something like that that would reduce the price over the week. But I'm putting, I guess, the minister, I noticed that it is at times onerous from people, and some people are very modest means when they arrive. I know many people in my constituency that are on receipt of community services and have to go to regional from time to time, and they kind of talk a friend into going to take them there, and they're going to stay, and they feel rather embarrassed. The $2 means a lot to them, and I think, you know, to merely say that it's just coming from another pot, I don't think is proper, Minister. I think that what we allow people on community services is the very bare minimum, and I think that should be taken into consideration at all times, parking fees and so on. So to merely say that it's just coming out of one pot versus another, I don't buy it, but nonetheless, I wanted to say that for the record. Now, I'm going to move into another area for a minute or two, which you may not have seen this coming, but it's about the emergency room in the Waterford Consolidated Hospital and its future. Now, I know I should give you a few minutes to compose yourself and get your notes, because you've probably never heard me talk about this. But, Minister, this is a very, although I make a little joke there, it's a very serious item in my constituency, Minister, because you know, I think, without fear of too much contradiction, Minister, that there's probably not too many communities in this very province that have given as much to the economic and the energy, the actual energy usage of this province, more than the town of New Waterford. Considering the amount of coal mines, that we have the largest generating station in the NSPI grid in Lingan, and may I say, you know, that by doing so, New Waterford not only used our real estate, but probably gave up one of the finest beaches in all of this province to do so. And I don't know whether, you know, that was done in the mid-70s. I don't know whether that would be a community would be that generous today, to put it mildly. But I guess where I'm going with this, Minister, is the fact that there's a lot of people in that community had given their life's work to helping this province, and we find ourselves in extremely hard economic times. And those very industries that supported this province through world wars and through international oil crisis and so on, these people are now find themselves elderly, some not so elderly, but most of them find themselves without employment, and it's a very hard thing to find themselves at this day, Ms. Minister. So I want to know from you, like, are these factors taken into consideration? I know we see the CTAS scores and so on, and the type of ailments that present themselves in Emerge, but I want to know, is there the real social cost taken into effect when the DHA is looking at reducing hours in that emergency room?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the short answer to that question is yes. You have to take all kinds of social factors into consideration, whether it's, you know, an emergency ward or some other aspect of a hospital or a school, for that matter. And communities are different, their histories are different, their acceptance of change is different. None of us would say nothing should ever change, but on the other hand, the CEO in Cape Breton, whom we all know is an excellent CEO and has achieved a great deal in the area, does not feel convinced that the emergency ward would be closed there. Otherwise, we would not have provided the funding that we did while further options are explored. I know that they needed the extra funding to keep it open, but I know there were questions about that consultant's report that was commissioned. We've talked about that privately. Not all hospitals, not all emergency wards can be open all the time, but yes, the community factors play a strong role in the decisions of whether or not they stay open. And it's fairly obvious people of New Waterford want their emergency ward. I would also like to refer back to something that the health critic for the Liberal Party said yesterday, and it was to do with the amount of change that the community has accepted in general in industrial Cape Breton. And indeed they have, and communities across Nova Scotia have accepted some of the change that's going on. Sometimes they accept it faster than the people in the professions, actually. And it is a testament partly to them and partly to Mr. Malcolm and all the people involved in the system, and perhaps even my associate deputy, that some of the things that need to change have been done and have been accepted. And we can only ask so much of people in communities in terms of the pace of change that we ask them to accept. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I agree with the minister when she talks about, that it's hard to accept change, and that's fine. But I think change is relative. I mean, if you change your tissues from Scotties to Kleenex, that's a change that most people would find fairly unintrusive and move on with. But when you have a service that you've depended on and for years, and to see it being kind of removed by virtue of more of an issue that they don't see in black and white in front of them, it's a hard change to accept. I mean, Minister, you and I have publicly and privately talked about this, about the opening hours and why that emergency room has been able to sustain the hours it has to now with physicians' availability, and we hope to continue that, and that we realize that's kind of a wild card, if you will, in this whole issue. But what we want to get to, I guess, is when we talk about the 7% being there and giving it long-term funding and the injection, so services would stay, at worst, the base level hopefully grow. And, I realize that you, as the minister, just can't arbitrarily say that New Waterford Consolidated Hospital will have emergency 24 hours, 7 days a week. And I appreciate that. It's up to DHA budgeting. But it's actually looking for you for comfort that if, we agree on Mr. Malcolm and his abilities and what he's meant to that DHA. But I'm looking for that, I guess from you, is that there is no directive coming from your department that's on the axe or on the block to be axed, that you will continue as minister to support that 24/7. You can go now.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, there's no, I'd like to confirm that there is no directive from my department that emergency ward or any should close, and there won't be. I mean, if we wanted to indulge in that level of decision-making, then we wouldn't have DHAs. I mean, we have to have people in local areas to manage the delivery of services. That can't be done from Halifax, even for Halifax. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member from Cape Breton Centre.
I want to thank the minister for her time and openness in answering the questions, and I'm going to now cede the floor to my colleague from Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you for that. I'd like to recognize the member from Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you. Who? Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in the government. I was going to stand up and ask the minister what the Premier has against her for having moved her into this portfolio just before the election, but of course then it's such an easy portfolio to manage without any difficulties, and I'm sure that it was being as a reward moving the minister into the Department of Health rather than the heavy tourism ministry. But Mr. Chair, on a more serious note, and I really don't want to go into a tirade at this point in time anyway with the with the minister. It's a little too early to that. And I don't want to use up the full remaining hour unless motivated to do so. However, what I really would like to do is just really lob some gentle questions to the minister, give the minister, who's certainly had the very difficult task of trying to defend the indefensible when it comes to the way in which the government has been treating the seniors of this province. So I thought I'd like to give her an opportunity to talk some positive good news, and that would be about the Sackville the Cobequid Community Health Centre, and give the minister an opportunity to rise on her place and to inform all of the multitude who may be listening, Mr. Chair, where exactly things stand at the present time. And I certainly am aware of the fundraising, and I know about the tenders and so on have been called, but I'd like to get some more clarification and on the public record as to when the minister now is foreseeing the ground being broken, when the minister is foreseeing, when it is committed to having this facility, a new facility opened up. Mr. Chair, I will say this at the outset, and that is that all of those who are on the foundation and on the body that have been working so hard within the community to get the new Cobequid Community Health Centre up and running, which it eventually will be, Mr. Chair, those people really deserve a tremendous vote of thanks and gratitude for all of the very hard work that they have been doing, and all of those for many years who have been pushing very hard for a replacement to the current multi-service centre. Mr. Chair, of course, the current Cobequid Centre is an old liquor store. No. It is located on Memory Lane. And Mr. Chair, maybe some of the, I don't know what came first, the name Memory Lane or the liquor store, and I don't know what is being remembered. But the reality is, Mr. Chair, that even with the additions that have gone on, that facility certainly is nowhere adequate to be able to meet the current needs of the growing communities around. And I'm sure that my colleague from Sackville-Beaverbank would agree to that in spades, Mr. Chair, that this facility is desperately needed. And the staff who work in there, they're a fantastic staff, but they're working in an extremely difficult situation. And also, Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Chair, and in addition to that, there isn't the room to be able to develop the kinds of programs that are going to be developed. So with that, Mr. Chair, I wonder if the minister would like to edify us, tell us how much money is in this year's budget allocated for that, and I'm sure that all that kind of information would be at the minister's fingertips, and to be able to tell us the time frames, and hopefully tell us that we're ahead of schedule now, not falling further behind, as the past minister did, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member, for your comments and also for your question, and we'll direct the questions to the Minister of Health. Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was just checking on something. But
About the liquor store at the
I wonder if that liquor store had Rob Joyce's. The funding for this year for the Cobequid Centre this year is in the capital grant section. It's not detailed in the capital grant section, but it will be about $5 million for this year. That means construction will start this year. I suppose, to be mischievous, you could have a groundbreaking ceremony anytime you wanted, but my best guess, it wouldn't be before the election. But construction would start this year. The drawings are being done, and that it should be complete within 2 to 2.5 years. And everything so far is on track. And for the record, there are many, many people not from that area, but from around the province, even some Tory supporters who, think this is a model for service delivery, the Cobequid Multi-Service Centre, and that there should be many more of them in the province. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to recognize a member from Sackville Cobequid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And indeed, Shirley Freer was quite a Tory, Mr. Chair. And Shirley Freer was one of those who was so key and instrumental in getting the original Cobequid Multi-Service Centre up and running. And even some Tories, Mr. Chair, can be visionaries, and she certainly was one who worked very, very hard. They seem to be becoming rarer, Mr. Chair, but it's still possible. And Mr. Chair, no, the minister is absolutely correct that the Cobequid Multi-Service Centre is a kind of model, and we've had people visit that centre from not only other parts of Canada, but from other parts of the world come and look at the kind of model, integrating both your health care and your social services within one kind of facility. And it's an excellent model, and I've always been a supporter of it, and I can't wait to see it up and running. And Mr. Chair, I'm not interested in a ground turning, a sod turning just before an election. In fact, that tends to make one a little bit skeptical. I remember a former Tory government once back in an election campaign back in '78, even before my time, when the government was, or the Tories were in opposition, promising that they were going to build a vocational school in the community of Sackville. Then, Mr. Chair, of course, nothing happened. So in 1981, they announced it again. And, Mr. Chair, surprisingly, nothing happened. But just before the 1984 election, when they announced it yet again, and they sent out the clear-cutting team that went out and chopped down all the trees, they also announced that they were going to put a pool in it. Surprising, Mr. Chair. That was 3 elections they were going to try to get out of it. Then, of course, when they didn't win that time out there, somebody else, we won't get into the history who won, but Mr. Chair, then some enterprising local constituent went out and put up another sign on that site. Beside the one which it said the future home of, they put another sign up, and it was called the Sackville Tory Reforestation Project. And in fact, Mr. Chair, that vocational school, of course, never did get done. So, just having a sod turning and an announcement isn't in itself any kind of commitment, Mr. Chair, that projects that somehow seem to get announced just before. What I'm interested in is actually those kind of concrete things that the minister is talking about. And I'm wondering if the minister, because you're saying that the capital amounts aren't budgeted in detail, would you agree to provide to me the actual amount that is, get this later on from staff, the actual amount that is budgeted for it, and the date on when you anticipate, I'm not holding to an exact date, when you anticipate that the architectural drawings and all the other kind of things that need to be done will have been done, and a tender call be able to be issued so that residents can know or have a fairly good handle on when exactly they can expect that the construction will get underway. And with that, Mr. Chair, if the minister agrees to those couple of requests, I will resume my seat and let somebody else continue the discussion with the minister. I won't go into all of the needs, because I know others are covering things like the inadequacy of the mental health services for the children and others in the community and all kinds of other things that are in desperately short supply, but I'll leave that to others who are covering it on a broader provincial basis.
Thank you. Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly we will be providing those details. As I understand it, things are different in health than other departments, surprise, surprise. And for the approval of capital project, we have the approval of the envelope of money for individual projects, and we require an order in council, but we can still provide the information as quickly as possible to the member. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, and I'm just really back up to get some clarification because of the minister's last comments. You're saying that there has been an envelope approved for capital projects. It sounds like that envelope has a bunch of different little slots that you haven't necessarily, government hasn't necessarily decided how many dollars go into each folder in that envelope. If that's not correct, if there is of that amount a certain amount that is designated for the Cobequid Centre this year, I'd like to hear that figure. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, the minister didn't come up with her best guesstimate as to when she expects that the tender calls can actually be made.
Thank you for the question. Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to clarify, it's the department would look at the ask list, which we already have looked at for various capital projects, and we make decisions about that. And the $5 million for Cobequid has been decided. There may be some others that will be bigger or smaller, but we would expect a tender call by late summer and early fall, and we would expect a sod turning by October. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'd like to recognize the member from Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the minister for that. So did I understand you correctly? I can be, my ears are youthfully challenged sometimes, and I don't hear things as clearly as maybe I should. But I think the minister said, is this correct, that there is $5 million that has been approved, but it is possible that there could be more out of that envelope going to the Cobequid Centre, but not less than $5 million?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wouldn't want to commit to that, Mr. Chair, but the major projects, we know what we're doing. It's some of the smaller projects that within that $30 million envelope that we still have to have a look at. But the capital projects over $1 million do require an order in council for the final sign-off on them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the youthful member from Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Astute Chair. What you're saying then is that, I think you're saying anyway, is that it's a formality. They have decided, and yes, I appreciate there has to be an order council actually to expend it, but that the request coming from this very thoughtful minister who is concerned about these important healthcare needs out there, that this minister is anticipating putting forward a request for an order in council for at least that amount of money this fiscal year.
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and that is absolutely correct.
The member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to resume my time questioning the minister with a number of quite varied areas where people certainly ask me to provide information that I haven't been able to sort of update with them for some time. One of the things I want to ask the minister is around the Provincial Health Council. I see that the Provincial Health Council essentially has a small increase in their budget for next year, but more or less will be operating at the same level. Now, the Provincial Health Council was a focus of a lot of controversy back in 1998 when I first arrived here. The former Liberal government had allowed the people who are appointed to the Provincial Health Council to those positions to become vacant. And as I understand it, right now on the Provincial Health Council, there are a number of vacancies that people have not been appointed for some time, that there may be as many as 5 vacant places on the Provincial Health Council. So this is certainly of concern to people who see the Provincial Health Council as a very important advisory committee to government and a watchdog in some ways for Nova Scotians, although I think the watchdog function has been minimized by this government in many respects. But could the minister please clarify if it's the intention of her government to fill those vacant council positions, and if so, when will they be filled, and if not, why not?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, it is our intention to fill those vacancies. We are behind in filling vacancies on a number of boards. It is our intention to try to speed that up. We have a new person taking over the process to try to speed it up. I believe also, this may not be the case with the Health Council, but with some other boards with vacant positions, sometimes the issue is not enough applications or not the right kinds of applications. There will be another ad going out, I believe, this month, sometime mid-April, looking for new applicants, and I'm certain if the member has anyone in mind who might like to apply, that I would encourage all members who know of people who might be good on the Health Council to encourage people to apply. Yes, we do need to improve the process because we have a number of boards that really can't function very well without the appointments, and we should hope to have that done within 2 to 3 months. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the minister for that. There are certainly a lot of people who are very capable of sitting on the Provincial Health Council and would bring, different perspectives. And I know that the council in the past has tried to reflect a fairly broad diversity, the diversity of the province, gender balance, representation around race, ethnicity, and people from a variety of different kinds of backgrounds, professional and working class and other kinds of backgrounds, which were really quite important, and people with a real interest and passion for health care and for wellness and health promotion. So I think it is important to keep that council functioning at an optimal level with participation from members of our community. I want to ask the minister about community health boards. Specifically, I want to talk about what I think are rather small, almost miserly amounts of monies that community health boards have to do what is really important work. And this government does talk about health promotion and wellness and how important this is, but yet when you look at the amounts of work that community health boards have to do many of their projects and programs, there's very little money assigned for their work. And I'll give you an example from the Capital District because I'm most familiar with the Capital District. The Capital District has quite recently set up what they call a community development fund, so that initiatives that come from the community that correspond with the health goals and objectives that have been set by the districts can actually be put into practice. That may be encouraging healthy behaviors around nutrition, a whole range of ideas that come from the community. Last year, the Capital District had, the Community Health Board had $20,000 to spend on these kinds of health promotion and wellness kinds of programs. They had $180,000 worth of projects seeking the $20,000 funding. And so the demand and the need is much greater than their ability to correspond to what's required. $20,000 sounds like nothing. It sounds like a really small amount. In the metropolitan area and beyond, which the Capital District serves. And I think, for example, of just the issue of youth violence. Youth violence in the U.S. has been developed the strategies for dealing with youth violence, and all the way from bullying to very serious, gun and weapon violence. It's been defined as a public health issue. And a lot of the initiatives for dealing with youth violence, for example, have been community-based, community development foundations for the interventions. And here, if we wanted to do a similar kind of thing, we have no ability to access health dollars unless we go through the community health boards. So, but with $20,000, they realistically are unable to develop meaningful strategies, I think, and to support the community in those strategies. So I want to ask the minister about the department's monitoring of the district authorities. You approve their budgets. You look at what they're allocating for the community health boards. What is your plan to try to ensure that community health boards have adequate amounts of money to do the kinds of community development and the development of primary health care, a broad definition of primary health care that should be occurring at the community level? It can't happen with this amount of money.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the member from Halifax Needham raises one particularly interesting issue, but the points are well made. The community health boards do a fantastic job, and they could do a better job with more money, obviously. And we have looked at what the districts allocate, and obviously the demand exceeds the supply of money. That's true everywhere in government. But we do know enough about what they do to know that they do some really great things, not just in the Capital District, but elsewhere. And I know that the Office of Health Promotion is going to be looking at what it can do to assist community health boards, whether it's in anti-smoking initiatives or whatever it is they have in mind. And I don't wish to speak for my colleague, but I know that there's going to be some interest in projects that they can tackle that they hope can make a difference in promoting better health. The issue of violence as a public health problem is an idea whose time has definitely come. Again, I won't speak for my colleague, but I've read some recent articles regarding the World Health Organization's classification as violence as a public health problem. It's an issue that actually bears a lot of discussion, because it is something that the Senior Citizens Secretariat people are really interested in terms of the amount of elder abuse that goes on. And it's something that the Advisory Council on the Status of Women is very interested in looking at. And certainly the executive director there feels that if domestic violence were looked at as a public health issue rather than a women's issue, that perhaps more might be done about it. So I think that over time, there is a lot of good work that can be done there, whether it's for women, older people, youth, and bullying, and all these other situations that are occurring more and more in our society. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax, Needham.
Well, just to pursue this a wee bit, I mean, I think that, domestic violence will probably always be a women's issue as long as women are the people who tend to be the victims in the vast majority of cases. But I think that one of the things about defining violence in terms of it being a public health issue, because it is so prevalent for so many groups like children, elders, women, between youth, and just to let the minister know and people from her department and maybe the Minister for Health Promotion, if they're going to be looking at this specifically around youth violence, there's a really quite a brilliant publication that's just come out called The Best Practices on Youth Violence Prevention that is done by an American Public Health Institute that has pulled together looking at what all of the American states who've been working on this for 15 years, this issue for 15 years, youth violence, and looking at the best interventions to decrease youth violence. And I have this publication courtesy of a student social worker who did her field placement in my constituency office this winter. And we've been using it with a new group in my constituency that I and Councillor Don Sloan and Alexa McDonough sort of pulled together after an incident where youth were involved with handguns in our community. And this group that have been working on the issue of youth violence in the North End of Halifax are called the North End Action Committee for a Nonviolent Community. And we would really very much like to pursue the notion that, that violence, especially in communities, is a public health issue, that it contributes to a lot of anxiety in the population, mental health, it brings out mental health issues in terms of people's security, sense of security in their community, and it puts a lot of stress on the healthcare system as well when people are in emergency departments and calling for ambulatory services, calling for the helplines, all of these kinds of things. I mean, I think it is something, an idea that we need to pursue in a really serious way. And I think that the community health boards are certainly ideally placed to work with communities on local programs and projects to try to build an anti-violent kind of culture in the communities where violence is occurring. So that's something maybe I can share with the minister and or the ministers, and I would be happy to do so. It's a really interesting publication. I also want to ask the minister, whatever happened to midwifery and this province's commitment? I think there's been a working group looking at integrating midwives into our healthcare system for a long time, but nothing seems to concretely happen in terms of moving that particular issue forward to ensuring that midwives have a place in healthcare in this province. Other provinces have licensed midwives. They have included them in the continuum of options that are available to women through their prenatal and postnatal care. And I think that for people who have worked so hard on this issue in the midwifery coalition, there is some sense of frustration and not being adequately heard and valued. So I'm wondering, where is that initiative? What is the province's plan? Why haven't we heard about this issue, and when can we expect to hear something concrete?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. And it is true that there are licensed midwives in other provinces, not all, but many other. It is also true that some representatives have been working with the primary health care group. This is an issue that was brought up earlier in question period in terms of the Primary Healthcare Transition Fund and what we access from Ottawa. And this fund is meant to assist provinces in changing from one system to another. And I don't think there's any question but that midwives have to be a part of primary health care reform. It's not, well, it's a no-brainer, really, particularly when you look at some of the trends in medical school enrollments, where fewer and fewer, students choose to be obstetricians. That is definitely an emerging trend. And I'm sure there are many reasons for that, but doctors want lives too. And being an obstetrician is a very demanding, non-lifestyle enhancing kind of a job. And family physicians, again, it used to be common for family physicians to deliver babies. That is less and less the case. I mean, obviously someone will if you have to, but there's so many issues in our society around needing a certain critical mass of expertise. I'm long past the stage, but if I were younger, I probably wouldn't want my baby delivered by someone who'd only done 1 or 2 a year, because it would scare me to death, the idea. So there's no question that that midwives who choose this occupation are going to have to be part of primary health care reform. So I realize progress is slow, and I'm sorry if they feel neglected, but they are part of the process, and they will have to be a part of the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Halifax, Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I also want to talk to the Minister for a moment about teen health care centres in the province, and whether or not they get any direct funding from the Department of Health, and what the government's plan is to sort of stabilize teen health centres. We've seen the Red Door, for example, in Kentville have some difficulties in terms of their funding, and teen health centres, the ones that I visit, are very, very heavily utilized by young people, which is probably a good thing. We've seen a small drop in the incidence of teenage pregnancy in Nova Scotia. Not a huge drop, but there's been a bit of a drop, which I think is a countrywide trend. I'm not sure about that, but I think so. And but just the same, I think teen health centers have a huge role to play in terms of the health of young people, the mental health, the physical health, the sexual health of young people. And so the question is, are they reliant on the district health authorities for their funding, or are there any grants that are provided directly from the Department of Health to them? Is there a strategy for teen health centers in the department?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's another interesting issue. There are some fairly well-established teen health centres in some schools and school boards in the province. There aren't teen health centres in others. It is something that is wanted in most of the newer schools that are built. I know that that's either, I'm not as up on my schools as I used to be a couple of months ago, but it's either in existence or going to be in existence at the new Halifax West High School. That's an issue in terms of strategy that people in public health have brought to the attention of the Associate Deputy and people in her area of the department as needing a strategy, because right now they are funded through the DHAs at their discretion. There are no direct grants from the Department of Health. Whether there should or shouldn't be, I don't know at this point, but obviously if we're going to be supporting them through tax dollars, which we are at the present time, then we should know the kinds of outcomes we expect, and we should have some better types of measurement of what they achieve. Now, whether or not those would actually, in the end, be associated with the Department of Health or the Department of Health promotion, I'm not quite sure. It might be a natural for the Department of Health promotion, but they are really important. The member from Halifax Needham is right in terms of having a place where kids can go talk to someone about birth control, bullying, whatever it is that they want to talk about. And I'm sure she's familiar with some of the health centers, perhaps not a teen health center per se, but some of the centers that are in malls and other areas where teens can go. For instance, the one at the Halifax Shopping Center. And again, it does in a way relate somewhat back to the problem of violence. That one does. But the teen health centers are a lot more than that. And again, we know we need a strategy, and we'll be working on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member's time for questions has expired. Chair recognizes the member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Minister, congratulations on your new posting. I'm sure you will appreciate that the health is one of the main issues facing the people of Richmond County, and that is one of their top priorities. And I wanted to ask a few questions in that regard. And I'm sure your predecessor will be familiar with some of these questions, as I've been asking them for the last 3 to 4 years, I guess, and some of them haven't changed, unfortunately, which requires me to ask them one more time. Madam Minister, the in-home support program, as you may or may not be aware, was a program which was being offered, which provided some financial assistance to family caregivers who were staying at home to take care of loved ones who technically would probably qualify for nursing home care, but who chose instead to want to remain at home. The money being invested to these caregivers was but a fraction of what cost it would have been if these loved ones were to go to nursing home facilities and have to pay a daily rate for years to come. I believe the figure was approximately about $400 a month that was given to the caregiver to provide for loved ones. Now, I'm using the $400 figure. That's for 2 loved ones in the case I'm thinking of. So maybe that number is not exact, but I'm sure the minister won't argue with me that $400 a month being provided to a caregiver is a lot cheaper than what it costs if that loved one is in a nursing home facility. Now, Minister, I don't need you to give me the history of the program and the problems with it. We all know that. Your government has told us that it was the municipalities that were providing it. It was inconsistent. You needed to bring some consistency to the program. No problem. No one disagrees with that. Yes, we want to see a provincial-wide program that's equally applicable whichever area of the province you find yourself in. So we don't need that history. But Minister, it's been 3 long years since you undertook the review. 3 years where you said no new applicants will be permitted under the program. Yet anyone who was in the program their funding was maintained. But no new applicants for 3 long years. And for 3 years I have written to your predecessor. I will write to you, Madam Minister, if you need more information, with the dozens of people that I have in Richmond County that are asking, when will we qualify for this program? And the problem is that they're having to make a decision that says, look, financially we cannot continue to provide care 24 hours a day to our loved one, therefore we have no choice but to place mom, dad, auntie, uncle in a nursing home because we need to return to the workforce to provide for our family. Therefore, Minister, I ask you today, can you please indicate to us what is the status of the in-home support program? When can we expect that people in Richmond County or anywhere else in the province will be able to make application and provide funding under the in-home support program?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I won't try to turn that into a long answer. It is mainly a funding issue. It's very unlikely we'll be able to do anything this year in that program, particularly in terms of the care of elderly people. One thing that we are doing is the children who are turning 19, who are being taken care of by community services. When they turn 19, we are taking that over and helping to provide continuing care for those, young adults. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Richmond.
Madam Minister, I appreciate the funding challenges that you do face, and I respect the fact that I was expecting that you would reply by saying, look, the member's telling us not to spend, now he's telling us to spend. But the fact is that the in-home support program is not spending. It is an investment being made, which at the end of the day would save your government money. Now, we've heard you say many times the cost of long-term care, the challenges faced with that, and how expensive it is. And we all know it's not going to get any better. It's going to get worse. There are going to be more loved ones going to nursing homes. There's going to be more costs for government to face, which is going to make a greater challenge, which is why the in-home support program was a strategic investment which at the end of the day provided government with savings because loved ones were remaining at home for a minimal cost to the government rather than them being in nursing home facilities. So I'm disappointed. I do appreciate the minister's honesty. I can tell you it would have been great if the former minister would have been so upfront and just told us don't expect any funding for the program, yet he continued just to drag the puck and refuse to tell us the forthrightness that at least this minister has told us. I can go back to Richmond and say, don't expect any funding this year. The minister has at least indicated to us. It's unfortunate, but at least we know that. When they call, I can give them at least that level of certainty. Can the minister indicate for these individuals who have been waiting 3 years, is there any hope in the near future that there will be another in-home support type program, or is the government indicating now, listen, in-home support was a thing of the past, it's gone, don't look for it anymore? Could you give us some form of clarification as to where that program lies and what the chances of seeing it again are?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the government, the department does see this program as a priority. But I can't put a timeline on it. We do need to have the funding. We have spent time working on this. We have a good idea of, in fact, a plan for the standards and a plan for accountability of the spending of the money. And it's a matter of having the funding for that in place, which we don't have this year because of other pressures on the budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Richmond.
Well, Minister, in one sense, I appreciate what you're saying. In another sense, it does cause me some form of confusion because at the end of the day, by not having this program, you're having more people going into your long-term care facilities, which is putting more pressure on your budget, which is costing you more money, which you're trying to make ends meet at the end of the day. I guess just from my own appreciation, my question to the minister would be, and I know she's been quite honest and forthright, which I do appreciate, does the minister agree that the in-home support program, in theory and in practice, did actually save the government money in the long term in regards to health care costs?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know what the member from Richmond is saying is true, but I also know both from this portfolio and the previous one, and I'm sure he knows, that there are so many good ways to spend money. There are many needs in the system, and almost everything you can do to help people can be seen as an investment, and it usually is. But the fact is that my present department could very easily handle spending the whole provincial budget on its own. And the demands are very high. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess, Minister, it draws me to the conclusion that your department, under your government, does not have a clear and comprehensive plan for health care in this province. Because if you did have a clear plan, a realistic plan, it makes no sense to me that the in-home support program would not be part of that plan, because at the end of the day, you need to get control of your nursing home costs. You need to get control of long-term care costs. If there's a way where certain investments can be made, which is going to save you money at the end of the day, one would think that that needs to be part of your plan. Yet, it causes me great concern when you tell me that in-home support's not on the radar screen this year, because your department, and when the minister says my department could swallow up the whole provincial budget, well, to me that is a clear admission that your government does not have a plan for health care. Because if you did have a plan, a realistic plan, you would say, here's how much money I need, and I'm going to make it work. By saying I could use all of this money and all of the budget, that means I don't have a plan. It could take the whole provincial budget because we don't have a vision. We're just going to continue throwing money and hope it gets better. And that is unfortunate. And I can tell you, I use Richmond County as an example, but I have no doubt this applies to all of Nova Scotia, where loved ones would stay at home and provide for their ailing family members in their last days when they want to remain at home. But there is a financial price to be paid for that. There is significant cost. We see more and more that there are care support societies that are being formed to help people who are dealing with loved ones and some of the frustrations that are involved with that. So I have to say I do appreciate the honesty of the minister, but I can't emphasize enough that if you're going to start putting a plan together, look at the in-home support program. I've seen how it works back in Richmond County. I can count how many people that could be in nursing homes right now. Instead, they are at home being cared for loved ones where they wish to be, at a tremendous savings to the taxpayer because of the fact that they are staying home. And if we are ever going to get control of nursing home fees, get control of the costs, we need to look at making these strategic investments, do so in a responsible way, but at the same time, it provides for a quality of care that some individuals want at home rather than being placed in nursing homes. The other point I wanted to make is that I do hope through this that you will start looking at in-home support. The last correspondence I believe I'd received from your predecessor had indicated your department was looking at in-home support, bringing it back, but if it did, one of the conditions would be that family members wouldn't qualify under the program. Now, Madam Minister, I hope you will appreciate that in most of these cases, it is family members who remain at home to care for a loved one. It's usually either a sister, brother, daughter, daughter-in-law, son-in-law, son, close family member. For the previous minister to say that family members wouldn't qualify, well, I'd almost argue it's questionable how worthy the program is if you're saying the family members wouldn't qualify under that. And he said, his response at the time was, well, it might be open to abuse. Well, now, There could be abuse in every single government program there is out there. But what do you have in health? You have home care workers. You have the people who do the intake. You have the nurses who go do home visits. There is your support network. There is your network that you have to make sure that there isn't abuse and that the program is not being abused. So I do not accept that family members shouldn't qualify under this. First of all, I believe it's discrimination. Second of all, I do believe you have the checks and balances within your current system that could address this. So I'm curious if the minister could indicate if that is what her department is looking at in regards to a possible new in-home support program, and if she'll commit today that family members would be able to qualify if the program is brought back in the near future.
The Honourable Minister of Health, we're drawing very close to the hour of adjournment, so if you could be brief.
I could be brief, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll have to double check on that for the member opposite, but it would seem to me that we need the kind of accountability measures in place that would apply to a family member or a non-family member. He's quite right. Any system is open to abuse. I would like to mention just briefly that we do have a new and expanded program with the Red Cross it's a loan, it's an equipment loan program for some of the kinds of supports that are needed for people who are being looked after at home. And this is one thing that we are moving on. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
The committee to now rise, report progress, and beg leave to sit again on a future day.